Good morning, everybody. Just giving a minute to make sure everybody gets in okay. So just give us a minute while we make sure that happens. So just allow any last minute people to join us. Letting everybody in. Hope everybody's doing okay today. It's Friday, so fingers crossed that's good for everybody. Nice thumbs up there, thank you. Okay. So welcome to Beyond the Behaviour. This session is on neurodiversity. So it's understanding neurodiversity in ASB and housing cases. However, a lot of what I'm going to cover in this session is actually quite relevant to any situation where you may suspect somebody's brain may be on a different operating system. That's how I like to describe it. So in terms of this session, we've got an hour together now. In terms of this session, I'm going to sort of share the stuff I've prepared for the next sort of 45, 50 minutes. And there will be an opportunity for Q&A at the end. And I usually get quite a lot of questions on this topic. And I've already got a couple of pre-submitted questions as well. So please feel free to pop your questions in the chat or Q&A as we go through this session. But for those of you that don't know me, because there's a few names I do recognise, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Marie Coombes. I'm the head of training for ADR mediation and training, and I'm also a mediator, a full-time mediator as well. I tend to describe myself as a conflict resolution specialist because it's not just about mediation, it's about those everyday conversations. And I spend a lot of time working and specialising in the relationship specifically between conflict, neurodiversity and mental health. Which basically means I spend all day helping people have the conversations they're usually avoiding. So in terms of today's session, the focus is on housing in ASB. It's not a specialist niche topic anymore. Unfortunately, this is a topic that's getting talked about more and more and more, which is great, but also there are a lot of misunderstandings, misinterpretations that sort of sit behind this as well, and I'm hoping to sort of dispel some of those today. What I do want to sort of highlight at this point, though, is that today's session is not actually a clinical session. So I don't want anybody to think they're going to be able to walk away and spot the signs. This isn't about diagnosing residents, and it's also very, very careful on how I say this. It's also about not excusing behaviour that is inappropriate, unsafe, harmful. It is about understanding what might be sitting underneath some of those behaviours, though, so that we can respond in a way that is clearer, more consistent, more boundaried, and more likely to reduce escalation, which means that we have those better conversations and that better communication. Because one of the things we're going to talk about as we go through today's session is behaviour is often the starting point, but actually it is rarely the whole story. So that's one of the things that we are going to focus on as we go through today. I mentioned that this isn't a niche topic. This is why it matters. So in terms of the current situation, this matters because in housing and ASB, we often have to make quick decisions about what that behaviour means, often from a place of safety. When someone escalates, we may assume they're being hostile. It's not all escalation into hostility, though. It's not all avoidance into disengagement. When somebody reacts strongly to what feels like a routine letter, a repair, appointment, a warning, we often assume they're making a big deal out of nothing. But the same interaction can feel very different to different brains. One person might hear feedback, another person might hear rejection. One person might hear a reasonable request, another person might hear, I'm being controlled. One person might hear a practical decision, whereas the other person might hear it as an injustice. And this is where conflict, regardless of what environment you are in, gets very, very complicated. So before we go any further, do just want to make an important distinction. We are all part of neurodiversity. Every single person on this call today is neurodiverse. We think differently, we process differently, we communicate differently, and we respond to stressful situations differently. But only some of us are actually neurodivergent. That means our brains process the world in ways that sit outside what society has decided is typical. That means ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, all of those names that sit under the neurodivergent umbrella. So when we're talking about conflict and neurodiversity in housing cases, we're not talking about a niche issue. We're talking about what happens when those different brains, those different nervous systems, and the different lived experiences meet under pressure. And that what often looks like conflict is actually a mismatch in so many different things. It's a mismatch in communication. It's a mismatch in information, in sensory processing, in autonomy. And the last one, in terms of felt safety. Now, that's a phrase that you might not have heard before. What we mean by felt safety is not safety as in, I have decided that this process, this visit, this letter, this meeting, or this decision is safe for you. Felt safety means that that person's nervous system experiences it as safe. And that is not the same thing. You could have a perfectly reasonable process that feels threatening to the person in it. You can have that polite conversation that still lands as criticism. This is what we mean by felt safety. It's not about excusing that behaviour, though. And it's not about saying anything goes because someone is neurodivergent. It's about asking better questions before we jump to judgment. What else might be happening here? What is this behaviour communicating? And how can we change the conditions enough for the conversation to become possible in a constructive way? But let's start with, who am I and what do I know about it? So I am actually neurodivergent myself. It's one reason why this topic is so huge for me. The picture on the screen that you see now is from 2018. In that picture, I look happy. I look like I feel comfortable, but I'm not. That is the masked version of me. At that point, I was a senior leader and a full-time mediator at Royal Mail. I spent my entire day trying to look right, sound right, sit right, respond right, and generally be less too much. I was good at my job, hopefully, but I was also exhausted. At this point, I didn't understand I was dyspraxic, dyslexic, autistic, and ADHD. I just thought I was somehow good at my job, but broken at the same time, which, to be fair, is quite a confusing performance review to give yourself. Now, the version of me that you saw when you came on the call today, and the version that you'll see towards the end of the session, if you can't see the little version of me, that's obviously 2026 version of me. I'm still a senior leader. I'm still a full-time mediator. I'm still deeply passionate about what I do, but I feel safe. I feel clear. I'm more myself. I'm often much more chaotic. Apologies to anybody who ever has to work with me, but I'm far more effective. So in terms of what that means, my brain hasn't changed. I've still got the same brain that I had in 2018. What has changed is the environment, the understanding and the response that I get. This is why I'm sharing this with you, because it's not abstract to me. You need to know you're talking to somebody who is neurodivergent. I know what it feels like when your brain processes differently, when a small change feels like the world is going to collapse in on you. I know what it feels like to look capable on the outside, or even incapable on the outside, while working incredibly hard underneath just to keep up, process, respond, and appear fine. So the difference isn't my brain changed. My brain is still doing 10 things at once in the hardest way possible, often losing my phone while it's still in my hand and walking into a table at the same time. The difference now is I understand what my brain is doing. So I was only diagnosed in 2024. I understand now what my brain is doing. And instead of punishing myself for the way my brain works, I have created spaces for myself where my brain can work in a way that feels comfortable, which means I am actually much more effective. In your world, you don't have to know whether somebody is neurodivergent or not. They may never disclose it. They might even quite often not know that they're neurodivergent, especially as it's a nightmare to get an assessment. They may never disclose it. They may never trust you or the services enough to share it. Or it might be that they're just in such a heightened place that they can't explain what's actually happening for them. So it's not about the diagnosis. It's about working with what we're seeing. That is the big difference. You actually don't need a diagnosis. This is about working with what we're seeing. It's getting better at understanding patterns. So let's look at what you probably see day after day. And I'm probably sure at the moment, anybody who's worked in housing more than 5 minutes is probably starting to get a bit twitchy seeing this. This slide probably looks really, really familiar. Repeated contact, trying again and again to have a good conversation with somebody, or them constantly contacting you over the same thing with the multiple complaints. Fixation on one issue, getting stuck on one issue, getting stuck on the same thing over and over again, and you getting so frustrated. Why can't they just see what I'm telling them? Why can't they just get it? Followed then by the difficulty in accepting decisions, the difficulty in accepting that you have made a decision because their brain hasn't processed it in the same way. Then we move on to things like refusal of access, emotional escalation, those behaviours you see when people don't like what we're telling us. And we often focus on the person doesn't like what we're telling them, when actually their brains are just trying to process what is going on. They may not like what's going on, but at the end of the day, they're trying to process it, and they're processing it in a different way, in a different time frame than you are. The accusations of unfairness not following process, that constant conflict with staff, neighbours or services. These are signs of all sorts of things, but in the neurodivergent context, they are often the inability to process or a different speed of processing, or there are three other things that potentially sit behind this as well that I'm going to come onto as we go through. They affect the people involved, they affect you, they affect your staff, they affect your organisation, they affect neighbours and communities, and it's not about minimising that impact. But if we only focus on what we're seeing, we risk missing what's actually going on, what's driving it. And if we miss the driver, we may choose an intervention that makes sense on paper, but doesn't actually reduce the escalation. So what might sit underneath? Everybody uses the iceberg analogy. It's because it works, basically. In terms of what sits underneath, what we're seeing on a day-to-day basis is probably around about 10% of what is going on for somebody. So 10% of what we see is actually behaviour. That's because behaviour is obvious. It's the first thing we see. Somebody is doing or not doing something. They're withdrawing, they're complaining, there's the repeated contact, there's the abuse over the phone or in person, refusal of access. All of those things are behaviours. We think about what the person is doing or not doing. Underneath those accusations of unfairness, underneath that emotional escalation, is 90% of what is actually going on for that person. And there's a whole list of things. I can talk for the rest of this session on how much shame has massively influenced how I show up in conversations. Because underneath the repeated contact, there may be uncertainty, which leads to a loss of control. Underneath long emails, there may be anxiety, working memory differences, or a need to document everything because a person does not trust that they will be heard. Underneath the unfairness, there may be justice insensitivity. Emotional escalation is shame, fear, rejection. Nervous system that has gone into a threat response, fight or flight. So underneath, they won't listen. There may be a person who can't process the information in the way that is currently being given. And I'll keep coming back to this sentence over and over again because understanding the driver does not remove the accountability. We still need to hold people accountable. We still need to make people responsible for their actions. But this is about understanding the 90% that's driving the 10%, because that then helps us choose the right intervention and the right next steps. Behaviour might still need a boundary. It may still need a consequence. It may still need risk management, but it is also telling us something. Yeah, so look beyond the behaviour, not to excuse it, but to understand it, to change it. So looking specifically at neurodiversity and conflict. Neurodiversity influences, or neurodivergent conditions influence how people process information, how they respond to change. The way that mine manifests itself is on some days when I've had a good night's sleep, change I welcome. If it's been communicated well, if I understand it, if I've had time to actually process what it's going to mean to me. Even if I don't like it, I will respond to change constructively. If I'm tired, if I'm not given space to process, if it's just thrown at me without any consideration of how it might land with me, my response to change is very, very different, and it is very resistant. How people experience fairness. Justice sensitivity, which I'm going to come on to in a second, is a massive thing with anybody who has a neurodivergent brain. Am I being treated fairly? But also, am I being treated fairly in the context of the process? Am I being treated fairly in the context of other people? So you may hear people that focus on, oh, that person over there is getting X, Y, and Z, and I'm not, or they're getting the support that I'm not. That might be because you've lost patience with that person, and I'm just as guilty of that as anybody else. You might have lost patience with that person, so you don't spend the extra 10 minutes having a chat with that person, whereas they may see you having that chat with the neighbour. So it's how people experience fairness is a big piece. How people communicate. I prefer to communicate verbally. I hate communicating in writing because my writing is always misjudged. I'm a straight to the point kind of person. I can't be bothered with the niceties. I just want to get straight to the point in an email. But you pick up the phone and have a chat with me, and I'm a completely different person. That's why often, if you contact ADR and you get me as a person, I will always ask for a chat first. It's also about how people manage emotion. I'm going to come on to that in a bit more detail in a second, and how people respond to pressure. So, like I said, the diagnosis is irrelevant when we're talking about communication. What matters is whatever is needed for all to truly understand. And that takes time, and it takes having the space to have that conversation. I appreciate in the day-to-day that's sometimes a challenge. I know it is a challenge for me at times. But whatever is needed for all to truly understand could save you so much time further down the line. I talk about this a lot in the workplace setting. Having the conversation now might take you half an hour. Taking the time and the space and the ability to make sure everybody understands the conversation might take time now, but I guarantee it will save you hours of stress further down the line. So the 3 hidden drivers that kind of sit behind this list here, I've hinted at some of these already. I actually struggle with all 3 of these, sometimes at the same time, which really makes my brain want to melt at times. So the rejection sensitivity. This is something that, unless you've actually felt it, is really, really, really hard to comprehend. Rejection sensitivity is an almost physical pain at perceived criticism, rejection, or dismissal, because it feels like an emotional threat. A letter, a warning, a missed call, a neutral tone, or we need to speak to you may land much harder than intended. Having somebody say, we need to have a chat, immediately fills me with a sense of dread, and it actually doesn't matter who it is that says that to me. It could be my husband, it could be my best friend, it could be previous managers. I will respond in the same way. I am in the worst trouble of my life. It sounds utterly ridiculous, but I don't have a huge amount of control over it. I understand what's going on now, so I do manage it very, very differently to how I used to. But if somebody doesn't realise that that's what's going on for them, that's the point they'll become defensive, distressed, angry. They may even become apologetic or shut down. They may go completely the opposite way. Because what they're trying to do is they're trying to take their brain and their body out of fight or flight in that moment because they've heard it as a threat. The second one, I guarantee you will have come up with against this one multiple times. It's justice sensitivity. So I mentioned this a little bit on the previous slide. This is where that perceived unfairness, inconsistency, or double standards become a major trigger. So in your cases, that might sound like, why are they allowed to do it? That's not what the policy says. Lost count of how many times I've heard that one. You told me one thing, but someone else told me something different. I'm supporting 2 or 3 organisations at the moment that are dealing with similar types of situations. That's not what the policy said. I had that one that said to me even yesterday. You're not following your own process. When I used to do workplace investigations, I used to hear that one in every single workplace investigation. You're not following your own process. For that person, fairness is not a side issue. It is the issue. And it's key. The key thing to say here is how they're perceiving fairness. It doesn't mean you're not being fair. It's how they're perceiving the actions. The last one is demand avoidance. And I'll give you a really silly example of what this looks like in my life in a second. But this is where pressure, instruction, or loss of control may trigger a resistance, a refusal, or a shutdown. So that might be somebody refusing access, ignoring a letter, or pushing back against an instruction, or becoming sarcastic or aggressive when told that they must do something. So I'll give you a little example of this, and some of you might have heard this story before. My husband no longer tells me to have a good day at work. And notice I say tells me. He used to say to me, have a good day at work, darling. My brain would immediately go, out of nowhere, no, I'm not going to do that. That's my demand avoidance kicking in. He's told me I'm going to have a good day at work. Therefore, my brain is now rebelling against that. What he actually says now is, what sort of day are you going to have? This isn't about removing the requirement. The safety checks need to happen. Boiler services still need to happen. Tenancy conditions still matter. Staff safety still matters. But it's how we communicate it. So for the demand avoidance one, sometimes it's just switching it to a question instead of a demand. We're still expecting the person to do X, Y, or Z, but we're framing it potentially as a choice instead of as a demand. These are not excuses, but they are clues. They are clues to look out for. They are clues to be mindful of that are going on, because these are all considerations when finding the most effective way to communicate with somebody. So the kind of things that trigger these things, so some of the common triggers, as I go through this, tick off how many of these that honestly you know have happened. So inconsistent information. One person asks one person within your organisation something, and then the next day they ring up somebody else and get a different response, or what they perceive as a different response. That inconsistent information creates that gap, which allows the threat feeling to come through. The unexpected change. We're going to come and do your gas checks on Friday morning. Friday afternoon, they're still waiting when the engineer turns up. And the engineer says, well, yeah, I was hoping to be here this morning, but that hasn't happened. That unexpected change for somebody who's neurodivergent creates a sense of threat. Unfamiliar staff. This is one that you probably can't avoid sometimes, but not dealing with somebody who is familiar to them can often create that gap. Unclear timescales. Delays without explanation links back to that example I just gave about the unexpected change. Being passed between teams, that is one of my biggest frustrations. One of my biggest frustrations, being passed between teams. Lack of consistency. There's a link, there's a thread that goes through all of these. The feeling dismissed, the feeling controlled rather than supported, appointments not happening as expected. There's two words that unite all of these: curiosity and clarity. And I go back to what I said right at the beginning when I talked about felt safety. Curiosity and clarity for somebody is what drives their felt safety. You cannot assume what that is for somebody. This is why that curiosity is so important, understanding what that felt safety might look for that person. And I've got some examples of how we can do that in a second. I've got some tools and tips and tricks as well. But sometimes the trigger is not the decision, it's the lack of clarity around that decision. Clarity is really key. And I know sometimes you can't give the level of clarity that somebody needs. I'm waiting for an engineer today to come and fix my internet. They're coming between 8 and 1. That for me is my brain is on that slight meltdown, and I'm constantly looking out the window and I can't relax and I'm fidgeting all over the place, because anytime between 8 and 1, that engineer can turn up. No, it might look, it'll be 5 to 1, but it's still between 8 and 1. Things like that really make my head hurt. They make my neurodivergent behaviours come more to the forefront. They create situations where I don't feel as safe. Therefore, I respond differently. So these are all common triggers. In terms of helping people move past that, what do we need to do in order to allow that person to engage with us in a different way? And at ADR, we use something called reset. This is a nice, neat little acronym that you can take away from today. Nice, neat little acronym that you can take away. That is five steps to you helping yourself and them through what is going on. What reset stands for, the first one is review. What is actually happening here? Go back to the iceberg. Yeah, I'm only seeing 10%. I'm focusing on the behaviors. I'm only seeing 10%. What might be sitting underneath that? It slows down the situation enough to choose the right response, just taking that time to think about what's actually happening. Yeah, because what often happens at this moment is, oh God, they've called again, so you restrict contact. They've refused access, so you escalate. They've sent another complaint, so you respond formally. Yeah, with that 17-page email that lands with the other person. They go, I didn't need all of that information. They've shouted at staff, so you issue a warning. So reset asks us to pause first. That review, what is actually happening is our pause. Not what are we assuming, not what label have we given this person, what is actually happening here? What are the patterns, the risks, the repeated themes? And then evaluate what might be driving it. Might be neurodivergence. It might be mental health. It might be that this person has history of other stuff with other housing associations in the past where they maybe haven't been treated fairly, genuinely haven't been. Is it uncertainty? Is it inconsistency? Is it a loss of control, unperceived unfairness, communication difficulty, emotional dysregulation, not being able to control their emotions? Is it a lack of trust between your organisation and them? The next one, support. What would help that person engage? Now, support doesn't mean removing those boundaries. It doesn't mean not tackling the things that are inappropriate, but it might be clearer updates, one contact route, realistic timelines, a named contact or different communication methods. And you're probably sitting there going, well, we do all that already. It might not necessarily be landing quite right. So I've got a few tips on that in a second. Engage. How do we communicate clearly and safely? How do we validate emotion? Not agree with it, validate emotion without agreeing with the behavior. How do we hold boundaries without escalating threat? How do we avoid mixed messages? It's the mixed messages that are often the biggest issue for somebody. The lack of clarity. So how do we make sure that somebody feels seen and heard at the same time as saying, actually, this isn't appropriate? Because it is okay to say that. And then finally, the T in reset is transform. What needs to change to reduce repeat escalation? Because the aim is not just to get through today's call or the email that's come through today. The aim is to reduce the repeat cycle. So that relationship, and I know one of the things that's happening, I'm getting asked for a lot when I run training now, is how do we manage the longer term relationships? How do we reset? How do we encourage that reduction in the repeat cycle? So reset helps us move from reacting to behavior to understanding and responding to what sits underneath it instead. Because one of the things that people don't necessarily understand when they don't work with conflict every single day, like I do, is it's the thing underneath that changes the behavior, not telling somebody to change their behavior. Especially if they've got demand avoidance and you're telling them to do something, the immediate answer will be no. So one of the things that you can do is have what I call one version of reality. Now, I guarantee some of these things are already happening. I guarantee you'll look through this and go, oh, we're already doing that. Having one lead contact. One deputy contact, so having a backup. One agreed message. I'm going to ask you about that one, not specifically ask you about it in a second. I want you to think about one agreed message. Do you actually have one agreed message? One communication route. One clear record. No extra information. And follow through. So the reason why this, I hesitate to say you are doing this, because you probably feel like you are, and for yourselves, you probably feel very much like, oh, we're doing all of those things. But let me just walk you through an example, yeah? When somebody rings up, one person says one thing. They ring up the next day, and another team says something slightly different. Now they've got two versions of the same information. Both people are just trying to be helpful. They're just trying to do their jobs in the best way possible. But that person's now sitting there going, hang on a minute, which version of this is true? Now the contractor's knocking on the door and telling me something different. And now I've got 3 or 4 versions of what I'm being told as the truth. Now, for someone who's already anxious, distrustful, or sensitive to fairness, that is evidence that the organisation is lying, incompetent, or treating them unfairly. So this is the reason why one lead contact and all these other things on the screen is so important. Now, I've worked with a few organisations recently, and I've been told over and over again, we moved to one agreed contact route. The thing that matters is not just naming the one lead contact. It's making sure everybody else around that case understood the plan. Because unless you communicate that plan to all staff and give them the wording they need to hold the boundary, one contact very quickly becomes everyone is involved again. It's not because anybody's doing anything wrong. It's because they're trying to be helpful. They're trying to answer the question. They're trying to support the organisation. Yeah. So sometimes it's about offering a script. That one agreed message is one of the biggest things that seems to be missing for me. That a script that goes around everybody. If this client rings, this is what you tell them. Your lead contact and your deputy contact is X. We will pass the message to them. They will contact you back. The script has to be said by everybody, not, oh, okay, let me just have a look. Let me see what I can tell you. No, your agreed contact is, I am not able to discuss this further or give you any additional information. Please use the agreed communication route, or I will leave a message for the agreed communication route if they have actually used that route and that person's not around. That is this common message. That is the one agreed message that has to be said by everybody other than the lead and the deputy. And that is often one of the missing links. The other one is the follow through. How often do you say to somebody, we'll be there by 10 o'clock, and at 10:30, that's the point you turn up? You might think, you know what, that's near enough. For the person who's sitting there waiting for that person to be there for 10 o'clock, you're half an hour late. It might not even be half an hour, it might be 2 minutes. Because that will be noticed. If you are not somebody who notices those things, because your brain doesn't work in that way, you'll just think, oh, it's 2 minutes past, that's all right. They're sitting there going, it's 2 minutes past, how dare they, they've let me down again. The follow through is key. Now, it might sound repetitive. It might sound like you're doing the same thing over and over again to try and get a different result, which I know is usually the definition of insanity. But having that one agreed message eventually starts to land in that person's brain. They just need a little bit longer for it to land quite often, but it lands in that person's brain and it starts to generate those feelings of safety. Okay, I don't like the message, but I'm getting the same message. Consistency is not just good administration. It's the repetition even that creates safety and clarity. And it creates that consistency. So of these things on here, the one agreed message and the follow through are 2 things that I would really like you to take away from today. Are we actually doing those things in that way? Just moving that on ever so slightly. One of the things I do like to talk about, and I've mentioned it a couple of times on here already, is around support and boundaries. This isn't about excusing behaviours. Neurodiversity informed practice is not about accepting abuse from anybody, whether that's a tenant, whether it's the person sitting next to you, whether it's somebody at home. It's not allowing unlimited contact. It's not removing accountability, and it's not avoiding enforcement where it is needed. It is not an excuse for poor behaviour. And I'll keep saying that over and over again. As a neurodivergent person myself, it is not an excuse for poor behaviour. What it is about reducing those avoidable triggers. What can I do to increase the level of consistency this person's feeling? What can I do to ensure this person's getting the same message? What can I do that when I say to somebody I'm going to get in touch with them on Friday, what can I do to make sure that actually happens? Even if I don't necessarily have an update. It's giving clear expectations. It's maintaining the boundaries calmly. I have a phrase, calm is contagious. The calmer you are, and this is universal to brains, the calmer you are, the more likely, you will stay calmer, and the other person will start to mirror you, the more trust they have in you. And it's about creating the conditions for engagement as well. Am I creating the right environment? Are you constantly emailing somebody who actually would prefer to have a chat? One of the things about written communication, again, this is universal. We never read written communication in the emotion it was written in. So you may have written the most friendly, clear email on the planet, but it's read in the emotion the person has when they open it. So you can do everything you possibly can to make an email as constructive and as supportive as possible, or as clear and direct as possible. But the other person will read it in the emotion they have. So if they've had a bad night's sleep, and again, universally, it doesn't matter who it is, if they've had a bad night's sleep and they receive that email, they will not read it in the way you wrote it. And they are more likely to respond to it negatively if they're feeling negative when they opened it. It's the thing that people tend to miss with written communication. So with compassion without boundaries can become unsafe. Boundaries without compassion escalates conflict. This isn't about agreeing with how somebody is feeling necessarily. It's about recognizing they feel that way. That's the difference. It's not agreeing with it, it's recognizing that that is how they're feeling. Even if I don't understand it or if I don't accept it, that's fine. You don't have to, but it's recognizing that that is how they're feeling. One of the ways we can help in these situations is just by simply using language that lowers threat. So, calm down. If anybody says to me, calm down, I immediately do the opposite. Has anybody ever calmed down in the history of the world by being told to calm down? I'm not sure. I can hear this is difficult. Let's slow this down. You're validating that this is a difficult situation for somebody. You're validating and they're reacting emotionally. You're not agreeing with it. That's the key. You're validating it. I can hear this is difficult. Let's slow this down. You're encouraging them to take a step back. You've already been told becomes, I appreciate you want clarity. The current position is. And you might follow that up with, is there anything in there that is unclear? Because you might think you're giving clarity, but it's always good to sense check that with somebody. You can't keep calling becomes, to keep information clear, we will use the agreed contact route. That could be the script everybody else has. The boundary remains, the delivery changes. We are not excusing anything. We are not excusing anybody's behaviour. We're not saying that anybody has the right to behave any way they want. What we're saying is we still have boundaries. We're just going to manage them differently. We can see something else is going on. We're just going to manage it differently. We're going to look at it through different eyes. We're going to look at it through the eyes of curiosity for us both to gain clarity. Which brings me to neurodiversity informed ASB practice means clearer communication. For you, for them, for your organisation. Have that one agreed message. Make sure, and you can have a universal agreed message regardless. Doesn't matter how many tenants that you need to have this for, you can have the same message. Yeah, that message of, I am not the agreed contact. I'll get them to get in touch with you, or please use that agreed contact method. Clearer communication establishes boundaries, and it also establishes expectations on everybody, so everybody knows what is expected of them. Having those better boundaries and maintaining them is key as well. The more you maintain a boundary, actually, the increase in I'm being treated fairly, because you're saying the same thing every time I do this thing. By creating the boundaries around communication, it feels repetitive, but that repetition is the thing that generates the, okay, I'm getting the same response every time. My brain knows that's safe. Fewer avoidable triggers. Yeah. Sometimes it's the little things that we get wrong. Little things that we can do differently, fewer avoidable triggers. One of the things I got asked the other day is, well, what if I can't get there for 10 o'clock on Friday? Give them a time slot. It doesn't feel completely comfortable to be told, I'll be there sometime between 10 and 2. And I'm in that situation today. It doesn't feel comfortable, but I know it'll be sometime between 10 and 2, as opposed to 10 a.m. It's very difficult quite often, especially with traffic and all the rest of it. It's very difficult sometimes to hit an exact time. So give yourself a bit of wiggle room. Give a half-hour slot. It'll be sometime between this time and this time. Because as much as that still feels a little bit uncertainty, it's not as bad as that person was going to be here at 10 o'clock and actually now it's 2 minutes past. Yeah. If you're saying to somebody, I'll follow up with you on Friday, you might sit there and go, well, I've got no update for them. I won't bother. That person's sitting there waiting for that update. The update should be, I've got no update, if you've got no update. Yeah. If you say you're going to do something, that's what that follow through is about. If you say you're going to do something, follow it through. Do what you say you're going to do. Even if the thing that you end up saying is, I don't have anything new for you today. Right, okay. You said you were going to follow up with me. You have followed up with me. I don't like the message, but I know where I stand. More consistent responses. Set out scripts for people. Yeah, one of the things that we're doing at ADR, we're putting together a one-day training course that will go into a lot more of these things in a lot more detail. And one of those things will be about talking about what do consistent responses look like. But being consistent, having the same message. Yeah, if you go for one single point of contact or a single point and a deputy, then everybody else gives the same message. The only two people that ever give a different message are these two people over here. Improved engagement. You're more likely to get improved engagement if you do all of these other things. This is what neurodiversity informed practice means, is all of these things. This is what it gives you when you just follow those simple steps, and they are quite simple. And everybody is safer. When we only respond to the behaviour, we miss the thing driving it. Yeah. We don't diagnose. We don't excuse. We don't remove accountability. We create a safe space where we've taken the time to understand what sits behind the behaviour to improve clarity through curiosity. So I am going to pause there because I've talked solid for 44 minutes. Any questions while I have a drink?
Just hopped off mute, Marie, to let you know that there is a question in the chat from Claire Spencer. So I don't know if you want to read it or do you want me to read it out to you?
No, I can see it. So if the communication route, i.e. email, isn't always appropriate, would you just explain to say that you need to visit them in person? I would actually take a step back from that and potentially say, what actually is your preferred method of communication? one of the things we do a lot of is we sometimes assume what would be helpful in this situation. And the simplest way is actually just to say, what would be helpful? Yeah. And sometimes I even share how I prefer. So I will always tell people I prefer to communicate verbally rather than in writing. Yeah. So I do a lot of things like voice notes and stuff like that. I always give people permission to not respond with voice notes. You don't have to. It's just that's my preferred method of communication. If you want to text back, that's absolutely fine. But we have the conversation about it. And that's one of the key things. It's like being curious around what that looks like, what that communication looks like. So I would ask the question first. If you have a preferred style, don't be afraid to share that with them and have a conversation about the best way to communicate, because that will naturally build trust and rapport with somebody. So I don't know if that's helpful. Let's see if there are any other questions.
It's all gone a bit bonkers because we've said about the training this autumn. So lots of people wanting to get on the wait list for that, which is great news.
Yeah, it is definitely great news. Yeah. Nothing worse than turning up to run some training and nobody's there. Yeah. I did have one question. I'm just trying to find where I wrote it down. The question that was sent in advance, just while anybody else has any other questions. So where did I write it down? Oh, the question I had is how can we avoid escalating someone further when we still need to enforce tenancy conditions, access requirements, or processes? So I don't know if this is a useful question for anybody else, but I know the person who's asked the question is going to be watching the replay. So the key to this is to separate the requirement from the way the requirement is communicated. So like I said a couple of times through this, there are certain things that are non-negotiable, that are not optional. Yeah, you need to do your checks. You sometimes need to do the visits. You need to make sure that all your processes are still maintained. Of course you do. This isn't about saying those things don't happen, but it's the way we communicate those requirements that can either increase or reduce it. So some of it's tone. I have three little things: tone, intent, and timing. They're the three things that seem to keep me on the right track, even with my sponge brain. Tone, intent, and timing. So using the language that is going to land better with them. So curiosity is always helpful in terms of tone and intent. Instead of saying you need to let us in, this is about this safety check does need to happen. Let's look at how we can arrange access in a way that's clear and manageable for you. Instead of if you don't cooperate, we'll take action. I want to be really clear about what needs to happen next, what your options are, and what may happen if access cannot be arranged. And then it's your tone, intent, and timing that sits behind that lands it. So if you always try and have the conversation from a curious perspective, if you think about it, if anybody's curious, you're more likely to respond in a constructive way. It's okay to be clear, but it's the way that you do it that's key. People don't actually have an issue with what you're asking or telling them to do. It's the way it's being done. Yeah. Any other questions? I don't know if that's helpful.
There's a couple more questions in the chat. It's very difficult when contractors don't turn up on time. It's out of our control.
Yes. So that's where I said what you might need to do. So it's a situation I'm in today, which I'll be honest with you, I'm twitchy as anything, but I know it's going to be between this time and this time. Even if it means that you have to say to someone it's going to be between 9 and 4. I know it's not ideal, but if there are any changes to that, or if there's any way that that contractor can say, you know what, I'm an hour away. If there's anything that could be done behind that, that is always helpful. But if you've got somebody who is very, very set on time, if you say, for example, the engineer will be there by 10 o'clock. Instead, they may have said to you, we'll be there by 10 o'clock, but maybe communicate that as they'll be there by 11. Yeah, sometimes it's just giving that little bit of wiggle room just in case. It's not about telling people untruths. It's just about making sure that expectations are set. If you know that 10 o'clock's not going to be met, don't say 10 o'clock. Or if there's a risk that that 10 o'clock's not going to be met, don't say 10 o'clock. Say it'll be between this time and this time instead. It still feels uncertainty, but it narrows the level of uncertainty.
Next question, Marie, is how do we respond to someone when they say, I have ADHD, so I can't change?
Okay. I've taken a moment there because I have said that a few times myself, and I always feel guilty when I do say it. Having ADHD, being ADHD myself, doesn't mean you can't change. It means that the environment makes you feel you can't change in that moment. It's taken me a long time to figure out the difference between those two. So it's not they can't change, it's in that moment, the environment is such that they don't feel safe to change. So it goes back to that reset again. It goes back to what is actually going on behind that. You've said there that you can't change. What is it about this situation that's left you feeling that way? That might be just a simple question you can ask. So it's that review. What's actually happening here? Somebody saying they can't do something is a sign of safety, especially with ADHD. It's paralysis. It's that stop moment that we can't get past. So what needs to happen to allow that person to feel safe?
Thank you. Next one is, what's the best approach on how to deal with someone who has personality disorder?
So I will have to take that question away because that isn't something that's specifically related to what we're covering today. It's actually a mental health, it's on the mental health side rather than the neurodiversity side. However, a lot of the stuff we've talked about today will work the same. Yeah, personality disorders is one of those muddy areas, and it's often people will often say, "Oh, I've been diagnosed with a personality disorder," and actually that language isn't used as much these days. So it's a slightly muddy area, but a lot of the same principles still work the same. That reset method pretty much works with 97% of the population. There'll be 3% that you will never ever get anywhere with. And unfortunately, the 3% feel like they take 97% of our time. I know that. I see that a lot as well. But 97% of people don't wake up in the morning being awkward on purpose. Yeah, they wake up in the morning wanting to make sure they get through their day in the psychologically safe way possible. Yeah, and that starts with that reset model. Review, evaluate, support, engage, transform. Yeah. But I will come back with the personality disorder one, and I'll share that with you, Pamela, for onward cascade.
Yeah. Next question is, what is the best approach when someone has escalated and becomes very abusive and difficult to talk to?
Again, it goes back to you are within your rights to set your boundaries. It is okay to say, please, in this moment, that language, that way you're behaving is not helpful. I want to keep us both safe. I want to make sure that we can have a conversation. Let's take a pause. Feel free to go and make yourself a cup of tea. I'll come back in 10 minutes. The best thing we can do in those situations sometimes is just go, look, let's just both take a step back so we don't both escalate this. Because unfortunately, what tends to happen is they escalate, so you escalate. And we do this, and then we end up in a slanging match in the street or in somebody's front room or whatever it might be. The best thing to do in that situation is say, okay, just take a step back a second. I appreciate that you're really frustrated in this moment, and I want to do what I can to ease that frustration. But we need to be able to have a conversation about it rather than just going shouting at each other because we're not getting anywhere. Let's take a pause. Or do you feel able to take a bit of a step back and see if we can talk about it differently? The key for me is the validation. I can see that this is difficult for you. That in itself is a natural de-escalation. So I'll give you a really, really silly example. If you've not had anything to eat for a while and you go in the supermarket and you're really hangry, how many of you will chuck cheese, crisps, cake, beer, wine, chocolate in your trolley? Yep, every single time. That's a great decision right now because you've made that decision based on emotion. If somebody said to you, "Oh, you're really hungry, should we go and get some food?" You'll probably choose slightly differently because somebody's recognized that in that moment you are responding emotionally and have given you space to go, "Oh, God, yeah, I am. I could eat a scabby dog." That's what we say in our house. We don't. But you're more likely to go, "Oh, I can take a step back from that. You know what? Nobody's ever said this, I know, but I really fancy an apple." Probably not, but you never know. There's a more of a fighting chance. When we're in a heightened emotion, we don't make good decisions. Trying to have those good decisions means that there's got to be a de-escalation. The de-escalation is, I see you, let's talk about it.
It's an interesting analogy to sales as well there, like in terms of in sales you'll talk match plus one. So if, for example, someone's coming in to buy a washing machine and they're distressed because their washing machine is busted, you should take their tone and match +1. In this scenario, it's kind of match -1, isn't it? It's
Exactly.
take the situation and look to be one level under.
At least, preferably 3 or 4.
Maybe one at a time.
Yeah, one at a time is a good start. As a mediator, I literally go to the bottom and go, okay, let's talk about this.
Yeah. That's it in terms of the questions. Everyone's saying it's been a really interesting session. They've been saying it's been really useful. So yeah, really good. Anyone got any final questions? No, just getting some really good feedback coming through. So really good.
I tried to answer all the questions in what I was saying. So fingers crossed. Are we sharing the slides, Pamela, just out of interest?
We will be sharing the slides. We'll also do a grab sheet as well, so a key takeaways grab sheet. So we'll get the team onto that as soon as the session is finished. And we just had really good feedback about the whole week as well. So thank you so much for everybody that's joined all the sessions this week. And in an answer to question around consultancy work, yes, we do. So please do drop us a message, because we do consultancy work. And yeah, everyone just saying lots of insightful stuff to take away. We will be sending out a recording link. So do subscribe to our YouTube channel, because all of this week's recordings are on the YouTube channel. You'll get the slides, you'll get the grab sheet. And we will also, for the people that have expressed interest to go on the course, we will be sending you out, priority booking for that, because there's only really 15 spaces on the person, pretty much nearly booked up already just by people in the waiting list. So that's great.
Brilliant. And feel free, anybody who wants to read, just search for my name on Google, and I pop up all over the place these days. And obviously, I'm a key part of ADR. So yeah, any support that we can give, just give us a shout. That's what we do. Thank
you so much, everyone.
Thank you for everybody's comments as well. I'm just catching up with them all now.
Yeah, it's really good. Yeah. Great. Are you happy to press N? Thank you so much.